what do you think of the modern Radical Orthodoxy Movement in theology? Father Aidan Nichols seems to be somewhat a part of that, but I'm also thinking of people like John Milbank, David Bentley Hart, and many others. Do you think these thinkers have a potential to clear the way for Catholic and Orthodox tradition? Or do you think they are too tainted by the Vatican II theology?
Very good question. Next. No, I'm not. No, well, firstly, let me say this about that. Father Nichols is probably my favorite living theologian.
Yeah, you recommended him. I remember previous shows. He's ultra realist, even though you said he wouldn't consider himself that.
No,
by
I
that
don't think he would.
Yeah,
but he's certainly very Platonic. He and the other fellow gentleman, Milbank, is a very well-known Anglican. Most of the Radical Orthodoxy movement are not Catholics. Some are.
what is the Radical Orthodoxy movement?
I'm not telling. Oh, no, the Radical Orthodoxy movement is exactly what you might guess from the title. These are theologians who want to go back to the roots, as it were, of our faith and then apply them radically to our current life, our modern life.
Well, see, radical is a relative term. Again, Solange Hertz talks about this. I mean, radical, pretty innocuous things to perhaps medieval Catholics could be considered radical to
exactly
good Americanists.
Exactly. And let's remember what radical ultimately means. It means return to the roots, radix.
Ah.
It doesn't mean return to radishes.
Oh, okay. Well, that clears that up.
Yeah, well, all you radish lovers out there, you're not being excluded, all right? It's just that this really isn't about you, but you're not excluded. No, it means returning to the roots, ultimately. And the thing is, as we know, ours is a civilization, a culture, based upon a ton of compromises. And these are compromises that have been necessary simply to do business, to survive. The problem is that those compromises are all falling apart. So now the question becomes, so where are we going to go? How then shall we live? What direction are we going? Now, unless you're going to say that a sort of bland, colorless compromise is a good in itself, which I don't think anybody will do, no matter what you believe, what our radical Orthodox friends would say is that we've taken a wrong turning somewhere. It might be the Reformation, it might be earlier, it might be later, and we need to retrace our steps, go back to the roots of our problem, beyond them, and then apply what we learned from that to where we are now. And a very good example is, again, I take you back to Father Nichols, two books in particular. One is called Christendom Awake, which deals with every aspect of life, not unlike my own Star Spangled Crown. Oh, I'm sorry, was that a plug?
Yes.
It's the second time. Who's it available from?
At TumblerHouse.com. TumblerHouse.com.
Very good. It's called the Star Spangled Crown. Anyway, but he does it in a much more theological way, in a much richer way, you might say, than I do. And he talks about what is needed to be done, really, if society is to be saved.
Are there concrete examples?
That he gives?
These are pretty abstract. Yeah, what are some concrete examples?
He gives historical examples. I mean, obviously, because he's English, he's very much concerned with England. Okay. And what makes the English example interesting, and he delves into this in the second book of his I'd recommend very strongly, The Realm, which is about, as he calls it, an unpopular argument for the conversion of England, which nobody talks about anymore, any more than we talk about the conversion of America. Nope. But he points out, one, that England is on its way out, not unlike the United States and every other Western country. Two, if she's to avoid that, she has to return to her faith, to the Catholic faith, no less.
Okay.
Now, what makes the English case interesting is that they have in their society and government and culture all sorts of desiccated remains of a Catholic order that have had the interiors flushed out of them while leaving the shells intact.
Right. We always seem to be talking about this. Like that question in the other show. Do you think the British monarchy is secretly Catholic?
Well, yeah, which, is true and it's not true.
Yeah.
It's not true in the sense, as I said then, it's not secretly Catholic in the sense that Queen Elizabeth and the royal family secretly attend High Mass in the depths of Buckingham Palace.
It's part of the show.
Yeah, it's part of the show, it's part of what gives the whole thing meaning. But that's also true with Parliament, it's true with their cities and towns and their shires, with the universities, with every aspect of life. You can see the remnants of the Catholic past. It just doesn't mean anything. Now it's very important to them, and that's one of the differences, by the way, between Americans and British, is that for us, things have to be pragmatic for us to be interested in them, for us to like them. We have a certain contempt for what we consider empty ceremony, unless it involves kissing the Liberty Bell or jumping up and down about the Constitution. Then suddenly we get very much like our English cousins. But, I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen. Waving the flag, not letting it touch the ground, that's us. Oh, it suddenly hit you, didn't it? Yes, we do our own empty ceremonial. We really do. We pretend it isn't empty.
No, we don't.
We don't pretend it's empty. You got me there.
I don't believe what you're saying, so it's a lie.
Thank you.
In the words of your...
my nephew Alvin. I don't like that, so it's a lie. And anybody I disagree with is Hitler. So, but no, but that caught you, didn't it, just then?
Yeah.
Yeah. We all do it. It's not just the English. It's just it's so much easier to see in other people.
Right.
Anyway, what is different, though, between them and us is that our symbols and empty ceremonial are all self-made and made up, whereas the English are the remnants of something that was real once. And what Father Nichols is arguing, and you see elements of this in some of the other Radical Orthodox, is that through the conversion of the nation, these things be brought back to life. He basically argues, why can't we have the form and the substance?
Does he think England will be easier to convert because there's more to work with there, as compared to America?
I don't know that he's ever said that. He might have, I don't know.
Oh, okay.
But it would seem to make sense.
Okay.
Let's put it this way. Every country has advantages and disadvantages toward evangelization. By that I mean, there is, for every nation in the world, has a certain preparatio evangelium, a certain preparation for the gospel. Like, for instance, with the Japanese, everyone's making a big deal about silence today because it makes Western intellectuals feel good about betraying the faith of their fathers.
Right, Silence, the Scorsese film.
Right, and it makes them feel good about betraying the faith and all that. Jesuits in particular of a certain age group love it.
Right.
But the fact is that in Japan today, amongst real Japanese, not to be confused with elderly Westerners, there is a bit of an uptick of interest in the Japanese martyrs. There was, for instance, a castle whose people were all Christian, and they rose up and then were besieged and killed. It's become a big tourist spot for Japanese.
Mm-hmm.
And if the church in Japan were interested in evangelization, that interest is exactly the jumping off point they could use. But that's very different from the English fossilized Catholic ceremonial. It's very different from the French communal Catholicism that's all over the place. You see, every country has its own areas that could be used.
Right.
With us, it varies tremendously from state to state and region to region. So, like, here we've got the missions. And we have the Catholic element in Old Hollywood. And there was one, believe me. Yeah, it's true. You look at Blessed Sacrament, where I got my first communion. Blessed Sacrament, Hollywood, Jesuit fathers, IHM nuns.
You're talking about the city more than the...
I'm talking about, well, no, I'm not talking about
industry.
I'm talking about the industry. The industry had a lot in the old days, not least because even the Jewish movie makers understood the attraction of Catholic symbolism. But beyond that, as I've said on other broadcasts, it's important to remember that in this country, our entertainment industry was brought to us, although it's a Protestant country, and it was and to some degree still is a primarily white country, the three marginal elements were the producers of its popular entertainment: blacks, Jews, and Catholics. There are reasons for that. But in all these areas, if we were interested in evangelizing our country, that's the kind of stuff we'd start out with. But we're not, so we don't, but nevertheless. But it is, I think, a harder fit than it is for the English.
Okay.
Not impossible, and certainly easier than what the Japanese have to work with. But, you know, everything is different. In Canada, it's both easier and harder, because amongst the French Canadians, we're an apostate people, but our apostasy was a relatively short time ago. In fact, within my lifetime. But the Anglo-Canadians, part of their ethos is that they're not French. And being French also meant being Catholic. But at the same time, the Anglo-Canadians do have a tradition of their own, the so-called High Tory tradition, that is very High Church Anglican and has certain connections that could be explored. So, to answer his question, what do I think of radical orthodoxy? If it is used as a means of evangelization, and I believe it certainly can be, then I'm all for it. If it's simply an end in itself, then it's like any other end in itself. Fall short.
Okay, what about his other questions? Do you think these thinkers have a potential to clear the way for Catholic and Orthodox tradition, or do you think they're too tainted by Vatican II theology?
Well, firstly, because most of them, including Father Nichols, who's a convert, do not come from a cradle Catholic origin. That's not a question that means anything. Vatican II theology is not, how do I put this? It's just not there. It's not on the... Let me put this another way. When a person comes to see the church as a thing, he's not attracted to it by Vatican II.
That's true.
He's attracted to it by what is unchanging, by what Benedict XVI would call the hermeneutic of tradition. That's what attracts an outsider to the church. So it's not really a relevant question.
These rock and roll youth masses don't attract him?
No, oddly enough.
Oh.
And that, so I mean, it's not, Vatican II theology is something, you know, that doesn't apply to them because they never had it. They're coming from a completely different tradition entirely. I mean, it's kind of a hard question. It's like what period did I fight in Vietnam, and how do I feel as a Vietnam veteran? Well, I didn't. I wasn't there.
You know, I just finished rereading Desire and Deception. Oh, sorry.
Well, I was just going to say, this kind of question is like, how would you say, Mr. Coulombe, how would you say your combat experience in Vietnam has affected your life? Well, I was never in Vietnam, and I wasn't in combat in Vietnam, so I can't even answer it hasn't, because that would imply that I was over there fighting.
Yeah, of course.
But it just, my combat experience in Vietnam never existed.
Yeah.
So I really, the question isn't really relevant. You see what I mean?
Right. So yeah, he never was involved. So there is no taint of Vatican II.
There's no taint, and it just doesn't touch anywhere.
It doesn't touch anything. Well, what I was going to say, I reread Desire and Deception.
Ah, what a wonderful book.
And
was that a plug?
You seem to be doing this comparison in this one area of Unitarian belief with Vatican II theology.
Well,
a little bit.
I did, because there was a reason for that. One, I love Unitarian theology.
Of course.
To the degree there is any. Because it was so, what's the word, intangible. I mean, one thing you can't accuse the radical orthodoxy people of being is intangible. Quite the contrary. They're interested in making the faith real in everyday life, in every element of life, in government, in society, in music, in culture. Everything with the faith, nothing against the faith, nothing outside the faith. to paraphrase Mussolini about the state.
Right.
And so, it is the opposite of that kind of. Remember what the theologians of Vatican II, well, some of them, not all of them, were trying to do was to baptize the modern world, basically, as they saw it.
Mm.
This was based upon several misapprehensions. One was that the modern world was a thing, as opposed to a moment in time. And baptizing a moment in time is very hard.
Yeah.
But they, having lived through the world wars, ladies and gentlemen, and certainly World War II, a lot of the fathers of Vatican II believed that we had arrived in a new era, and that new era meant something. It meant about as much as JFK's haircut, because that time passed very quickly. All of the givens of that era are gone. The United States are no longer a self-defined Christian country. The Soviet Union no longer exists. We do not live in the world of 1963. But the theologians of that period, the dominant party, believed that we had entered a new age and that it would be permanent. Instead, they came up with a theology that lasted for a world that lasted about a decade, 2 decades. And now, when so many of its younger adherents have outlived it themselves, they're furiously attempting to force reality to fit it. It was a great theology, and we got to make the world around us fit it now. Well, no. That's, anyway.